The stars above the colony world of New Avalon shined brightly, but for its people, there was no beauty in the night sky. Only fear. The Exilary Empire had come again. In the past months, they had already taken 5 human colonies. They enslaved the survivors, destroyed homes, and laughed at humanity's weakness. The United Earth Federation had sent messages, pleaded for peace, but the Exilary only answered with more bloodshed. Now, their warships loomed over New Avalon like hungry beasts. The people below, men, women, and children, waited for the horror to begin. They knew the Exilary would not show mercy. They never did. But tonight, something was different. Aboard the UEF Retribution, Captain Darius Kane stood tall, staring at the massive screen before him. The Exilary fleet was in orbit, weapons armed, ready to strike. His hands clenched into fists. He had seen what the Exilary did to human colonies. He had seen the burned cities, the mass graves. Not again. Darius took a deep breath. Then, he sent a transmission directly to the Exilary flagship. The alien warlord High Marshal Vectal appeared on the screen. His golden armor gleamed under the dim lights of his command bridge. His reptilian face twisted into an amused smirk. "Ah, the humans finally call," Vectal said, voice full of mockery. "Come to beg for mercy, Captain Kane." Darius leaned forward. His blue eyes burned with fury. "No," he said coldly. "I came to give you a final warning." The bridge of the UEF Retribution fell silent. Even his officers looked at him in surprise. Vectal laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. "A warning. From you. A species that crawled out of its homeworld barely 2 centuries ago." Darius ignored the insult. His voice remained steady. "Leave New Avalon. Leave all human colonies. Stop your attacks, or face the consequences." Vectal leaned back in his throne, shaking his head. "Consequences? You are weak. Your people kneel when we commanded. What could humans possibly do to us?" Darius stared at him, unblinking. Then he said just 3 words. "Try and find out." For the first time, Vectal hesitated. There was no fear in Darius's voice, no desperation, only certainty. It unsettled him. But he quickly regained his arrogance. "Very well," he sneered. "If you will not surrender, then we will do what we always do." He turned to his officers. "Begin the bombardment." From the Exilary warships, plasma cannons hummed to life. The sky above New Avalon turned red with the glow of charging weapons. On the ground, people screamed. Families huddled together, praying for a miracle. Then something unexpected happened. The moment the first Exilary ship fired its plasma cannons, it exploded. A massive fireball erupted in space. The wreckage of the ship spiraled down, crashing into the ocean below. Vectal's eyes widened. What? His officers scrambled to their controls. More ships suddenly lost power, their engines shutting down one by one. Others exploded from the inside, torn apart by something they couldn't see. A voice echoed across the Exilary command channels. "We warned you." It was Darius Kane. Out of the darkness, human warships emerged. They had been hidden in the shadows, silent, invisible. These were human stealth ships, a new technology the Exilary had never seen before. They had waited for this moment. Now, they struck with precision and fury. The UEF Retribution led the charge, its railguns tearing through Exilary ships like paper. Other human ships, black as night, moved like shadows, appearing only when they fired, then vanishing again. The Exilary fleet, once so confident, now panicked. "We are under attack," a Exilary officer screamed. "Where did they kill him from?" Vectal's hands shook. This wasn't the weak, desperate humanity he had known. This was something else. Aboard the UEF Retribution, Darius watched as the Exilary fleet fell apart. His second in command, Lieutenant Sarah Briggs, turned to him. "Sir, We are receiving enemy surrender signals. Should we accept? Darius stared at the wreckage, at the desperate auxiliary ships trying to flee. How many human worlds had burned because of them? He took a deep breath. Then he gave his order. No survivors. The human fleet obeyed. They fired without hesitation. One by one, the auxiliary ships were destroyed. For the first time in history, the auxiliary were running. For the first time, they felt fear. Hours later, the battle was over. New Avalon was safe. Darius Kane sent out one final transmission, not just to the auxiliary, but to every empire in the galaxy. A simple message. Humanity will not kneel. Push us too far, and you will regret it. The war had begun. But this time, humanity was ready. The wreckage of the auxiliary fleet still burned in the skies above New Avalon. The battle was over, but for Captain Darius Kane, it was only the beginning. He stood on the bridge of the UEF Retribution, watching as the last auxiliary ships tried to flee. Their once mighty war fleet had been reduced to broken hulls and scattered debris. Yet, even as victory settled over the human forces, Darius knew the auxiliary would not forget this. They would return, and next time, they would come in greater numbers. Humanity had just declared war on one of the most ruthless empires in the galaxy. There was no turning back now. A transmission request flashed on the screen. It was from Admiral Ethan Graves, commander of the United Earth Federation's Second Fleet. Darius accepted the call, and the Admiral's stern face appeared before him. "You just started a war, Captain," Graves said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Darius met his gaze without hesitation. "We were already in a war, Admiral. The difference is, now we're fighting back." The Admiral exhaled slowly, nodding. "High Command is in chaos. Some of them wanted to keep negotiating with the auxiliary. But after tonight, the choice has been made for us." He leaned forward, his expression hard. "Earth is sending reinforcements. We need to move fast before the auxiliary regroup." On the ground, the people of New Avalon cheered. They had seen destruction before, had lived under the constant fear of alien warships appearing in their skies. But tonight, they saw something new. Humanity standing tall, refusing to bow. Darius and his crew knew the celebrations would be short-lived. The auxiliary never took defeat lightly. Somewhere out there, High Marshal Vectal was still alive, and he would not forget what had happened here. He would return with vengeance. The only question was when. Far from New Avalon, deep in the cold void of space, the surviving auxiliary ships limped away, their hulls scared and broken. Aboard his flagship, Vectal sat in silence, his claws gripping the arms of his throne. Rage burned through him. Never before had the auxiliary suffered such humiliation at the hands of a lesser species. He had underestimated the humans, dismissed them as weak and insignificant. That mistake had cost him dearly. He would not make it again. As his officers waited in fearful silence, he finally spoke. "Send a message to the Emperor. Tell him the humans have declared war." His golden eyes gleamed with cold fury. "And tell him I will be the one to end it." Back on the UEF Retribution, Darius watched the last enemy signals disappear from the scanners. He knew what was coming. The auxiliary would return in force. Humanity had bought itself time, but time alone would not be enough. They needed to prepare, to strike first before the enemy could recover. He turned to his crew, his voice steady. "We're not waiting for them to come to us," he said. "Set a course for the nearest auxiliary outpost." His officers exchanged glances, understanding the weight of his words. They were no longer just defending themselves. This was war. And in war, the only way to survive was to hit first, hit hard, and never stop. As the engines roared to life and the human fleet moved into the darkness of space, a new chapter in history had begun. The galaxy had long seen humanity as nothing more than an upstart race, a minor species barely worth acknowledging. But that had changed. The auxiliary had pushed too far, and now they would learn what it meant to awaken the fury of mankind. The next battle was coming, and this time, humanity would not be the hunted. They would be the hunt. The UEF Retribution emerged from slip space near the auxiliary outpost on the edge of their territory. The station floated in the darkness, its defenses active but unprepared for what was coming. Darius Kane stood on the bridge, his eyes locked on the enemy installation. This was not a rescue mission, not a defensive stand. This was an attack. Humanity had spent too long reacting to the auxiliary. Now, they were taking the fight to them. "Target their communication arrays," Darius ordered. "We cut them off before they can call for help." Lieutenant Harper nodded and relayed the command. Moments later, bright streaks of light shot from the Retribution's railguns. The round struck with deadly precision, ripping apart the outpost's main antennae in a fiery explosion. Inside the station, alarms blared as auxiliary officers scrambled to respond. The enemy's defensive batteries roared to life, spewing plasma toward the attacking fleet. But the humans were ready. The Retribution and its escort ships moved with practiced precision, dodging fire while delivering punishing counterattacks. The outpost's shields flickered, struggling to hold under the relentless barrage. "Send the boarding teams," Darius commanded. Dropships shot out from the human fleet, weaving through enemy fire as they raced toward the station. Sergeant Cole Ramirez led the assault squad, gripping his rifle tightly as the dropship shuddered from turbulence. The moment they breached the station's docking bay, his team poured out, weapons raised. Auxiliary soldiers rushed to meet them, but the humans moved fast and struck hard. Ramirez fired a burst, dropping the first enemy before diving behind cover. His squad spread out, clearing the room in seconds. Inside the control center, High Warden Keswick bared his fangs. The humans had been underestimated, and now they were inside his station. He grabbed his communicator, only to find static. No way to call for help. He snarled in frustration. "Seal the core chamber. We cannot let them take control of this station." But the humans were faster. Ramirez's squad pushed forward, clearing corridors and securing key points. They'd reached the control center just as the last of the auxiliary officers tried to lock them out. A well-placed grenade ended the resistance. Ramirez stepped over the bodies and activated his comm. "Captain, the station is ours." On the Retribution, Darius allowed himself a small smile. This was more than a victory. This was a message. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. The auxiliary had pushed too far, and now they would face the consequences. Far away, in the heart of the auxiliary empire, High Marshal Vectel received the news of the outpost's fall. His claws dug into the armrest of his chair, his rage barely contained. "Fools," he growled. "They dare strike at us." He stood, his golden eyes burning with fury. "Assemble the fleet. It's time to remind humanity of their place." The war had truly begun. The auxiliary fleet arrived at the ruined outpost too late. The station was silent, its defenses shattered, its crew either dead or missing. The humans had left nothing but wreckage and a single message, burned into the station's hull with high-powered plasma charges. "You pushed too far." High Marshal Vectel stood on the bridge of his warship, staring at the remains of the station. His claws curled into fists as he read the message. The humans had dared to strike first, had dared to humiliate the auxiliary again. This was no longer about war. This was about vengeance. His second-in-command, Captain Zirak, stood beside him, his posture rigid with fear. "High Marshal, the humans are moving deeper into our borders. Intelligence suggests they are striking key supply routes and communication hubs." Vectel's rage simmered. "They are trying to weaken us before we can strike back." He turned to his officers. "Summon every available fleet commander. The humans want a war. We will give them a war they cannot survive." Meanwhile, aboard the UEF Retribution, Darius Kane studied the star map in the war room. Their attacks had been successful so far, but he knew this was only the beginning. The auxiliary would retaliate, and when they did, it would be with overwhelming force. Admiral Graves had already warned him. Humanity was fighting an empire far larger, far older, and far more ruthless than anything they had faced before. "We need to be smarter," Darius said, looking at his officers. "We can't match them ship for ship, but we don't have to. We make them bleed where it hurts most. We keep them off balance, force them to react instead of plan." Commander Saravos, his tactical officer, nodded. "Hit their fuel depots, their weapon factories. Make them fight a war they can't sustain." The plan was set. As the human fleet moved again, striking deep into Xilari-controlled space, panic spread through the enemy ranks. The Xilari had always fought wars on their terms, crushing weaker races before they could resist. But the humans were different. They didn't fight like prey. They fought like predators. Across the galaxy, news of humanity's defiance spread. Other species, long oppressed by the Xilari, watched with growing interest. If the humans could stand against the Empire, perhaps others could too. But Vectal was not going to let that happen. He stood before his assembled fleet commanders, his voice cold and full of promise. "Burn every human colony. Destroy every ship. Show them what happens to those who defy us." The Xilari war machine was moving. The real battle was about to begin. The first human colony to fall was Vega 7. The Xilari came in overwhelming numbers, their warships blotting out the sky as they rained destruction from above. The planetary defenses fought bravely, but they were outmatched. In hours, the colony was reduced to burning rubble. Survivors were rounded up, forced to kneel before the Xilari warlords as a message was broadcast to humanity. "This is the price of your defiance." Admiral Graves received the footage aboard the UEF Warspite. His expression was grim as he watched the Xilari execute human civilians, their bodies left as warnings for any who dared to resist. Around him, officers clenched their fists in silent fury. The room was thick with rage. Darius Kane stood beside him, his jaw tight. "They're trying to break us," he said, "to make us fear them." Graves exhaled slowly. "They don't understand what they've just done." He turned to his officers. "The time for small strikes is over. We are going to hit back, and we are going to make them regret ever setting foot on human soil." The plan was bold, almost suicidal. Instead of playing defense, humanity would take the fight straight to the Xilari's most critical supply lines. They would target the massive war factories on Kesar Prime, a planet deep within enemy territory, responsible for producing nearly half of the Xilari's warships. If they could cripple Kesar Prime, they could buy humanity time to turn the tide of war. As the human fleet prepared for the assault, the soldiers of the United Earth Forces braced themselves. Every Marine, every pilot, every officer knew what was at stake. Vega 7 had been a massacre, but it would be the last. Humanity was done running. Aboard the Retribution, Sergeant Cole Ramirez checked his weapon, his mind focused. He had seen too many worlds burn, too many innocent lives lost. This mission wasn't just about strategy. It was personal. When the human fleet emerged from slip space near Kesar Prime, alarms blared across the planet. The Xilari had expected humanity to retreat, to hide. They had never imagined the humans would dare to strike this deep into their empire. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Missiles streaked toward the planet's surface. Orbital bombardments shattered key production facilities. Special forces teams landed on the ground, fighting through Xilari defenders to sabotage supply depots and shipyards. Chaos erupted across Kesar Prime. The Xilari war machine had never faced an enemy willing to strike them at their core. As explosions rocked the planet, Darius Kane stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the destruction unfold. This wasn't just revenge. This was war, and humanity was just getting started. The Xilari never expected to lose Kesar Prime. The flames of destruction still raged across the war factories, and the debris of their shattered defenses drifted in orbit. But what struck fear into the Xilari warlords wasn't just the loss of a key production world. It was the realization that the humans were no longer reacting. They were attacking. High Marshal Vectal listened to the reports in cold silence. The humans had crippled one of the most important military centers in the Empire. Entire fleets would now be delayed, weapons and supplies running low. But what angered him the most was that this was not a desperate act of defiance. This was a strategy. "They fight like us," Captain Xerak admitted, his voice uneasy. "Not like prey, like hunters." Vectil's claws dug into the armrest of his war throne. "Then we make them bleed. Prepare the execution fleets." Across Silari space, warships were recalled, their mission no longer to conquer but to exterminate. Every remaining human colony became a target. No mercy, no survivors. If humanity wanted total war, the Xilari would give it to them. But humanity was already prepared. On Earth, the UEF High Command reviewed the latest reports. The war had reached its most dangerous stage. The Xilari were no longer fighting for dominance. They were fighting for vengeance. But so was humanity. "We hit Kesar Prime," Admiral Graves said, his voice steady. "Now they'll try to wipe us out." He looked around at the gathered officers. "Which means we finally have them right where we want them." Darius Kane leaned forward. "They think they're the hunters. But we are the storm." The UEF fleet moved into position, not to defend Earth, but to ambush the incoming Xilari execution fleets before they could reach human worlds. Every battle-hardened warship, every Marine, every pilot knew this was the moment. Win here, and humanity would turn the tide forever. Lose, and Earth would burn. When the Xilari execution fleets arrived, expecting easy victories, they found something else instead. A trap. The battle that followed would be written into history. Human warships burst from hidden positions, unleashing a firestorm of destruction. Xilari ships, used to overwhelming their enemies, now found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought. In the chaos, Sergeant Cole Ramirez led his squad onto its Xilari command ship. Fighting through corridors of alien warriors, he finally reached the bridge and planted explosives at the heart of the enemy war machine. The last thing the Xilari captain saw was Ramirez giving a mocking salute before detonating the charges. One by one, the Xilari fleets fell. Vectal received the news in stunned silence. The humans had not only survived, they had destroyed the Empire's greatest war fleets. For the first time in his life, he felt something alien and unwelcome in his chest. Fear. The war was no longer about crushing humanity. It was about surviving them. The Xilari Empire had never known fear, until now. The execution fleets, once the symbol of their unstoppable power, were nothing but wreckage floating in the void. Humanity had turned their greatest weapons against them, tearing apart their war machine with ruthless precision. And now, for the first time in the Empire's history, they were on the defensive. High Marshal Vectal stood alone in the war chamber, staring at the holographic map of his once mighty empire. Red markers flashed where human forces had struck. Strategic worlds lost. Entire fleets obliterated. The humans were not just fighting back. They were hunting. His claws clenched as he turned to his advisors. "They won't stop until they reach our homeworld." Captain Xerak hesitated. "What are your orders, High Marshal?" Vectal took a slow breath. The truth was bitter. If they continued fighting as they had, the humans would burn their empire to the ground. They needed a new plan, a desperate one. "Summon the council," he growled. "It is time we discuss terms." Meanwhile, aboard the UEF Retribution, Admiral Graves received the transmission with cold satisfaction. The Xilari were requesting negotiations. Darius Kane stood beside him, arms crossed. "You think they're serious?" Graves studied the message, then shook his head. "They're stalling, trying to regroup. But it doesn't matter." He turned to his officers. "We're not stopping until we make sure they never threaten us again." The UEF fleet pushed forward, driving deep into Xilari space. One by one, their strongholds crumbled. On the ground, Sergeant Cole Ramirez led the final assault against the last Silari-controlled war facility. As he and his squad cleared the enemy fortifications, he knew this was it. The end of the war was near. On the Silari homeworld, Vectal faced the final reality. His empire had fallen. His fleets were gone. His war was lost. He stood before the council, his voice bitter but firm. "We must surrender." The words burned in his throat, but there was no other choice. If they did not, there would be no empire left to save. When the surrender message reached the human fleet, there was no celebration, no cheers, just a quiet understanding. Humanity had done what no other species had dared. They had brought the Silari Empire to its knees. Darius Kane stood on the bridge, looking out into the endless stars. The war was over, but humanity had changed forever. The galaxy would never forget the day that Silari pushed too far, and they would always regret it.